probably looked at certain families and wondered how they do it. Not the ones who made the news last year, not the founder who sold the startup or the athlete who signed the contract. The other ones, the families who have simply always had money, not in a flashy announcement-making way, but in a structural, generational, apparently effortless way that has nothing to do with a single big moment and everything to do with something that happened before you were paying attention. You know a family like this. Maybe not personally, but you've seen them. The family whose kids never talked about money stress the way your friends did, whose parents made certain decisions about cars, about houses, about vacations that seemed almost understated relative to what they clearly could have afforded, whose financial life looked, from the outside, almost boring, and whose net worth, if you ever found out the real number, would make the boringness suddenly make complete sense. You've probably told yourself that family started with advantages you didn't have, and maybe they did. But here's what the research on multi-generational wealth consistently shows. The advantage wasn't the starting amount, it was the framework, the specific set of beliefs, habits, and mental models about money that family transferred deliberately across generations in ways that most families never attempt and most financial content never explains. Today, we're going through exactly what that framework looks like, the 6 mindset distinctions that separate families who stay wealthy across generations from families where the wealth peaks in one generation and evaporates in the next. I'm William. Let's get into what old money actually understands that new money almost never does.
1. They distinguish between money and wealth. The difference is everything. New money thinks about money. Old money thinks about wealth. These are not the same cognitive frame, and they don't produce the same decisions. Money is a flow, income arriving, expenses leaving, the monthly balance between them. Thinking in money produces decisions calibrated to the current month, the current year, the current income level. The question is always some version of, can I afford this? Wealth is a stock, the accumulated capital that exists independent of this month's income, that compounds regardless of whether anyone is actively adding to it, that represents a permanently different relationship with financial risk than any income level alone provides. Old money families think in wealth. They make decisions based on what a choice does to the stock, to the permanent capital base, rather than what it does to the monthly cash flow. A purchase that fits comfortably within the monthly income but draws down the invested capital is not, in their frame, an affordable purchase. It is a withdrawal from the wealth base, and withdrawals from the wealth base require justification that cash flow management alone never requires. The shift from money thinking to wealth thinking is the first and most fundamental mindset change that separates the first generation of wealth from the families that preserve it across several. Most people never make it because the income and expense frame is the frame that everyone around them uses and the frame that financial content reinforces almost universally.
2. They understand the difference between the first and subsequent generations' role. Old money families have an explicit understanding, sometimes spoken, sometimes simply practiced, of what different generations owe each other in the wealth-building project. The first generation builds. They accumulate the initial capital through combination of income, discipline, and the compounding that follows sustained savings rates applied across decades. Their job is to create the stock from which everything else follows. The second generation's job is fundamentally different. Their job is to not destroy what was built, and to learn, with enough specificity to teach it to the third generation, why the first generation made the decisions they made. Not the surface-level decisions, drive a modest car, live below income, invest consistently, the underlying reasoning, the mental models, the specific framework for evaluating financial decisions that produce the outcomes, not just the outcomes themselves. The third generation's job is to apply that reasoning to a world that looks different from the one the first generation navigated, to demonstrate that the framework transfers across contexts, not just the specific behaviors. The wealth that disappears in 3 generations, and research consistently shows 70% of family wealth is gone by the second generation and 90% by the third, almost universally disappears because the transfer was of outcomes rather than reasoning. The children receive the capital without understanding the decision framework that produced it. They can't replicate what they've never understood, and they can't teach what they never learned.
3. They treat the portfolio as a family member with a permanent seat at the table. This sounds abstract. The practice is specific. Old money families make financial decisions with explicit reference to the portfolio's long-term trajectory, not just the current balance, but the compounding arc, the withdrawal rate, the sequence of returns exposure, and what the portfolio will look like in 20 years under different behavioral assumptions. In practical terms, this means the portfolio has an implicit vote in family decisions. A business venture that requires liquidating a significant portion of the invested capital isn't evaluated purely on the venture's merits. It's evaluated against what the liquidated capital would have become if left invested, and whether the venture's expected return justifies that opportunity cost. A lifestyle upgrade that increases the withdrawal rate is evaluated against the long-term portfolio trajectory it implies, not just whether the current income supports it. Most families treat the portfolio as a number on a statement. Old money families treat it as an entity with its own logic, its own trajectory, and its own requirements, one of which is that it not be disrupted without explicit justification proportional to the disruption. 4. They practice financial transparency within the family as a deliberate teaching mechanism. One of the most consistently documented characteristics of families that maintain wealth across multiple generations is that they talk about money, specifically, concretely, and without the social discomfort that most families bring to the subject. Not as boasting, not as complaint, as information transfer. The 10-year-old knows, in age-appropriate terms, what a compound interest is and why it matters. The 16-year-old understands what the family's investment portfolio is doing and roughly why it's structured the way it is. The 22-year-old entering the workforce has a framework for evaluating financial decisions that their peers, who grew up in households where money was either a source of stress or a subject of silence, simply don't have. This is the most transferable asset old money families pass to the next generation, not the capital itself, but the financial literacy that allows the capital to be maintained and grown, rather than depleted by the behavioral patterns that specific literacy was designed to prevent. The family that talks openly about net worth, about investment decisions, about mistakes made and why they were mistakes, and about the specific reasoning behind financial choices is giving its children something that no inheritance can replicate if the knowledge is absent: the capacity to be the kind of person who builds and maintains wealth rather than receives and depletes it. 5. They separate the consumption budget from the capital base permanently. Old money families operate with a structural distinction that most households never establish. The capital base is not available for consumption, ever, under any circumstances, without explicit family deliberation proportional to the magnitude of the withdrawal. The income, dividends, returns, salary, business distributions, is available for living. The invested principal is not a savings account that can be tapped when income falls short or a lifestyle upgrade seems affordable. It is a separate entity with a separate purpose: to compound permanently and produce the income streams that fund the family's life without ever being depleted. This structural separation is not primarily financial, it is psychological. Most families who receive or build significant wealth treat the capital base as a very large savings account, available in principle if something requires it. Old money families treat it as categorically unavailable, in the way that most people treat money they've already spent as unavailable. The psychological accounting is different, and that difference produces dramatically different preservation rates across decades. The practical implementation? The investment portfolio lives in accounts that are genuinely inconvenient to access,
not impossible, but inconvenient enough that the friction interrupts impulsive withdrawal, in the same way that the separation between checking and savings accounts interrupts impulsive spending at the household level.
6. They define wealth in terms of time, not money. The most fundamental difference between old money and new money thinking is not the amount, it is the unit of measurement. New money measures wealth in dollars, a number that either satisfies or doesn't, that compares well or badly to a reference group, that moves up and down with the market and produces corresponding emotional responses. Old money measures wealth in time, specifically in the number of years the invested capital can sustain the family's standard of living without any additional income. A family with $3 million invested at a 4% withdrawal rate, generating $120,000 annually, is not asking how much they have. They are noting that they have permanent income, not years of income, permanent income, provided the capital is not depleted. This reframe is not semantic. It produces different decisions. A family measuring in time asks, does this decision extend or shorten our time horizon? A purchase that seems affordable in money terms might shorten the time horizon in ways that a time-denominated analysis makes immediately visible. A decision to increase the savings rate extends the time horizon in ways that the money-denominated analysis never captures, because more money and more time are not the same thing, even when they're the same number. Teach yourself and your family to measure in time. It will change which decisions feel affordable, which feel necessary, and which feel obviously wrong in a way that dollar-denominated analysis consistently fails to surface. The families that stay wealthy across generations are not smarter, luckier, or more disciplined in the ordinary sense of the word. They operate with a different cognitive framework, one that distinguishes money from wealth, income from capital, consumption from compounding, the current generation's role from the next generation's responsibility, and dollars from time. None of these frameworks are inherited, they are taught, deliberately, explicitly, and early enough that the next generation enters adulthood with the mental models already installed, rather than receiving the capital without the context and discovering, too late, why the context was the more valuable inheritance. The wealth that lasts isn't the wealth that's the largest, it's the wealth that comes with the understanding of why it exists and what it requires to stay. Most people who receive significant wealth never get that understanding. The families that provide it are the ones the research shows still have it 3 generations later. The capital transfers in a will. The framework transfers in a conversation. Make sure your family is having both.